Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us to share the key recommendations for the Developing Innovative Mobility Solutions in Brussels project. We started this project a little over a year ago, and we have been working with Brussels Mobility and the European Commission, and also drawing on input from many stakeholders over the course of the work. We have been extremely grateful for their time and input, and we are delighted to have this opportunity to discuss the key recommendations that have come out of the work before the final report goes in at the end of the month. So in terms of timeline, just to let you know, we have this dissemination event today for the key recommendations, and then the final full report will be submitted at the end of the month. That will then be published and freely available from the ITF website in early December. But in the meantime, a summary of the recommendations that you're going to hear today will be available from the ITF website, and we will send an email after the event with the link to that. So we are very lucky today to have Minister Elke Brandt joining us, and in a moment I will invite her to open the event officially. We're also very grateful to have Director Nathalie Berger, the Director for Support to Member States Reforms, and Secretary General Young Tae Kim of the International Transport Forum, both of whom you will hear from shortly also. At the end of the event, after the presentation of the results, we will have about half an hour for discussion of those recommendations. And so I would invite you to please use the Q&A function, which you should see at the bottom of your screen, to submit any questions that you have that we can put to the project team and to the invited speakers. Equally, interpretation is available from the same options at the bottom of your screen if you would prefer to listen in French or Dutch. So, without
Français ou en néerlandais. Sans plus attendre, je vais demander à la ministre Van den Brandt d'inaugurer officiellement cette manifestation. Merci beaucoup, je suis très...
Op gang te trekken. Hartelijk dank. Welkom aan iedereen. We zijn heel blij op dit belangrijke moment online.
Some advantages because I'm at the moment in Lisbon for the Velocity conference, and it makes it possible to combine. It makes it possible to be here and to realize how important this project is, how important intermodality is, and where the future lies. And we need projects like MaaS. We need projects like this to prepare for the future, and the future is happening already. So we don't have much time. So I'm very happy to be here today. I'm very honored to be able to open this session and to present, or to have people present you the results of these interesting conclusions. And if I could take one thing out, it's about MaaS is about creating, it's an application technology, but it's especially about creating an ecosystem. It's about creating a network, making sure that everybody is involved, and creating this ecosystem. It's not something easy to do, but it is essential to make everything work. And I think that's necessary if we want to create a MaaS topic, if we want to have everybody if we want to have everybody in this system, but also to create this project, because we needed this project to learn, to have the experts work on it. And even for this, we had this small ecosystem of people working together and making it possible to have all these interesting results. And I really would like to thank everybody who has participated in doing so, because I think there's an incredible work being done by people. I can always take credits, but I don't think it would be fair to take credits for everything that's done here. And of course, I would have to start with the European Commission, that is, and the DG Reform, that it's making things possible with their support, but the ITF team, especially also, of course, Mr. Kim, I would like to thank you, but all of the people working with you on this project, but also the people from the administration in Brussels, Monsieur Lefranc, I think you did a wonderful job. People from the STIP MIVB, Monsieur Fontaine, I see you're here, so thank you very much. And all the other participants, all the other people who are somehow involved in this little ecosystem to make this project to have a big ecosystem in the near future, what would be the MaaS. But I don't think it's interesting to listen to me. I think we should listen to the results. So I'm going to stop here and wish you an inspirational morning. And I hope you all had a good coffee to listen to the results.
So it's a great pleasure to be here with you today to open this event together with Minister Van den Brandt and the Secretary General of the International Transport Forum, Mr. Kim. It gives me the opportunity to share my appreciation for our our very constructive collaboration so far with both the International Transport Forum and the OECD, and with Brussels Mobility, but also the Brussels Capital Region on this forward-looking project, a very important project, landmark project, I should say. I would also like to thank our colleagues in the Commission in DG Move, whose role has been instrumental in the recommendations included in this final report. This project was a novelty for our services. We had provided support for many mobility projects during our past technical support rounds, but this was the first time we were providing support to prepare a public administration for the eventual development of a digital solution integrating seamless end-to-end planning, booking, electronic ticketing, and payment services across all available modes of transportation, be they public or private. In other words, facilitating the access to all existing mobility alternatives in order to reduce the relevance of private car ownership. So I mentioned the importance of facilitating the access to all existing mobility alternatives in order to reduce the relevance of private car ownership, what we call mobility as a service, or MaaS. MaaS could potentially provide an alternative way to move more people and more goods in a way that is faster, cleaner, and cheaper. And in times like these, this is the best way forward. This project was also very timely, when all the focus was towards green and digital, the development of urban mobility plans, while introducing new dynamics, that of a digital market, into the mobility service sector was the best way forward. This project is important for Europe as a whole. The European climate law makes legally binding the EU's objective of becoming climate neutral by 2050. And transport is an integral part of the European Green Deal, with its goal to cut of 90% in emissions by 2050, delivered by a smart, competitive, safe, accessible, digital, and affordable transport system. To support this target, the European Commission has presented in December the Sustainable and Smart Mobility Strategy. The strategy offers a strategic vision and an action plan for the green and digital transition of the European transport system. We're thus very happy to have supported such a project, which in the long run will contribute to the development of a sustainable mobility system for the region by ensuring effective integration of transport services, non-discriminatory access for operators to the data management platform, and long-term financial sustainability for the services provided. And here, I would like to take this opportunity to inform you that we have taken a step further in introducing under the 2022 cycle of our technical support instrument, a flagship technical support project, which focuses on recharge and refuel, on clean, smart, and fair urban mobility. Flagships are initiatives that we develop in the European Commission on the basis of the needs that have been identified by the member states. And here we consider sustainable, accessible, and smart transport and zero and low emission vehicles supported by shared mobility services and recharging and refueling infrastructure. These all will contribute to making cities and regions cleaner and reaching climate neutrality by 2050. To this end, we are proposing under our TSI 2022 a flagship which offers activity packages for different areas to enable the member states to engage in effective and sustainable reforms and investments for cleaner, smarter, and more integrated urban mobility. I consider the very good collaboration and commitment from all parties as a key factor in a successful implementation of all our ongoing SRSP and TSI projects. The great work of the ITF and their contribution so far to the successful implementation of the project, but also the strong commitment of Brussels mobility and the Brussels capital region and the personal involvement of the minister. These have been the main ingredients required to turn a project into a success story that other member states, other regions can take inspirations from. And it is for this reason that we are proposing to have this project as one of our projects in the spotlight in the European Commission for October 2021. I very much look forward to our discussions and deliberations during this event today, and I would like to thank you all for the excellent collaboration, both in the implementation of such an important project, but also in the organization of today's event. Thank you very much.
Minister van den Brandt, Director Berger, dear audience here in Brussels and elsewhere, I'm very happy to be in Brussels today, though the lasting effects of the COVID pandemic means that we are streaming this event virtually and cannot all join in person as I would have much preferred. I'm happy because the work that we will present to you today falls in the heart of our mission at the ITF, which is to work for transport policies that improve people's lives. I'm also happy because this project has been carried out with a broad range of partners and stakeholders. It truly embodies the way in which we work best by being an interactive and open platform for the discussion of transport policy issues. We do this by working with our 63 member countries to foster a deeper understanding of the role of transport in economic growth, environmental sustainability, and social inclusion, and to raise the public profile of transport policy. As Minister van den Brandt knows well, we are faced with multiple challenges in and outside of the transport sector: congestion, safety, inequity, pollution, and climate change. These are serious challenges, and addressing them requires equally serious responses. Responses that address these challenges systematically and with a long-term view. That means implementing coherent, evidence-based policies in pursuit of clear objectives. Addressing these challenges will require action on a number of fronts: ensuring access, improving efficiency, fostering inclusivity, spurring innovation, and contributing to a sustainable and low-carbon future. And if we have learned anything in the past year and a half, is the fundamental need to ensure resilience. Brussels is a world leader in this respect. In the past, we have addressed these challenges in a siloed approach, working within each transport mode to optimize operations, services, and function. This has led to great improvements within each mode, but to systemic challenges as well. They can only be addressed by looking across all transport modes. This is at the heart of the work that we are presenting today. The shift from a focus on owning and operating single vehicles towards the seamless, effortless, and client-focused interconnection of multiple transport services, mobility as a service, or MaaS. This is a lot of hope that great efficiencies can be delivered through MaaS and that it can contribute to or even underpin the kind of policy outcomes that the Brussels capital region is working to deliver. But MaaS is a developing concept that requires many things, including a robust, fair, and effective regulatory framework. This is what we are here to present to you today, a set of recommendations that will help foster a MaaS ecosystem that improves the lives of the region's inhabitants and form a resilient mobility framework for these uncertain times. This year-long project was made possible by the European Union. Its funding came from the EU's Structural Reform Support Program. This program is an immense step forward in building capacity in old and new EU member countries. I would like to acknowledge the excellent cooperation my team has enjoyed with the Commission throughout this project, and I'm delighted Director Berger is able to be a part of the final event. My biggest thanks go to Minister van den Brandt and her team. Minister, we are honored by the trust that you place in the work of the ITF, and we are grateful for the ongoing support your staff has provided. And finally, I'd like to thank my own staff, who as always takes mission our members confide in us to heart and untiring devote their time to work for transport policies that improve people's lives. Today, we deliver our recommendations to the Brussels Capital Region, but these recommendations now have a life of their own. Going forward, they will serve to inform the design of the regulations underpinning the Brussels Capital Region MaaS ecosystem, but they will also serve as guidance for other regions and governments as they too seek to develop the regulatory framework for MaaS. A building is only as good as its foundations, and we hope that with this cooperation, we have all contributed to a solid and durable foundation for decentralized mobility solutions in the Brussels Capital Region and elsewhere. Now, I would like to invite Philip Christ to the ITF to present the key recommendations from the report. Philip, you have the floor.
Thank you, Young Tae. Now, before going into our recommendations to the Brussels Capital Region, I think it's worth going over how we got here. And nowhere better to start than just a bit north of here at the Atomium. If we can see the first slide, and the Atomium, why the Atomium? When the Atomium was built, it embodied a vision of modernity that embodied a lot of what thought was going to be the future. And that future was central in the vision around the 1958 World's Fair when the Atomium was built. It was also central to the way in which the Brussels Capital Region thought the evolution of its street networks would evolve. This is something that was captured at the time in some of the text around the thinking about the future of the Brussels Capital Region. In 1956, when the Atomium was being developed, in the report by the Ministry for Public Works and Reconstruction, they noted that if Brussels was to be the crossroads of the West, that Brussels must accommodate and even give priority to the circulation of automobiles in their centers. In Brussels and elsewhere afterwards, of course, the car expanded horizons and expanded opportunities, but that came at a cost. Now, if we fast forward to 2021, the car is still, of course, an important part of the urban mobility mix in the Brussels Capital Region, but its inhabitants have many other choices as well. More fundamentally, looking ahead, we see the beginning of a shift from the ownership of cars, bicycles, and scooters to digitally enabled usership of these vehicles. Here and elsewhere, we see a tremendous rise in app-enabled mobility services. Now, the Brussels Capital Region has the ambition to accompany and guide this transition in line with the sustainability outcomes it must deliver. And for this reason, and with the input from the region's inhabitants and other key stakeholders, the region developed Good Move, its award-winning urban mobility plan. This comprehensive plan outlines 50 actions in 6 broad thematic areas which hold promise to improve the sustainability of travel within the region and thus improve the quality of life for those who live and work here. At the heart of Good Move is a set of actions under the heading Good Service, which has the objective to provide each inhabitant with adapted, facilitated, and integrated mobility solutions, allowing them to opt for the most appropriate mode of travel for each of their trips, depending, of course, on their destination and their needs. How? Well, we've heard it already, by developing mobility as a service. Now, mobility as a service, or MaaS, is a distribution model for mobility services that uses shared data and a digital interface to efficiently source and manage the provision of transport-related services into a seamless offer which meets the mobility requirements of people. It has people at its center. What does MaaS promise? Improved choices for people, improved efficiency in the delivery of transport and mobility services, new opportunities for commercial and public actors, And crucially, for this region, it could improve the ability for the region to deliver on sustainability outcomes as per Good Move. But what MaaS is not is an app, or rather, it isn't just an app. The app is just an interface to access MaaS. For these apps to function, an entire MaaS ecosystem must be in place, as highlighted in the minister's opening statement. This ecosystem is comprised of mobility operators. As my colleague and our moderator today, Orla, says, if you can ride in it or on it, then it is a mobility operator. It is comprised of these new actors, MaaS providers. These are the public or commercial entities that offer travelers integrated travel options across multiple mobility operators on a subscription or on a pay-as-you-go basis. There is also the regulatory framework. The regulatory framework that underlies and determines the way in which these actors interact with each other and connect to each other to provide their mobility services that are going to be hopefully compelling enough for people to adopt them and thus replace some of their car trips. Now, before going into our recommendations, let me just emphasize that public transport must form the backbone of the MaaS ecosystem in the Brussels Capital Region if it is to contribute to the objectives of Good Move. There are concerns that a MaaS model with public transport at its core would struggle if MaaS providers cannot earn a margin on the resale of public transport tickets. Others worry that such resale of public transport tickets could reduce net revenues for public transport operators. Now, we address these points in the report, but let me just say that the way in which these concerns are addressed in the Brussels Capital Region should preferably be through the region's public transport management contract and not directly in a future mobility as a service ordinance. So our recommendations, we have 11 of them split into 3 categories: those that pertain to enabling the creation of the MaaS ecosystem, those that pertain to facilitating an efficient and equitable market, and one recommendation on how to manage mobility outcomes within and in interaction with the MaaS ecosystem. The region should adopt an open entry market approach to the provision of mobility as a service. Why? Because MaaS is an emerging market and its commercial viability remains unclear, as does the nature of the MaaS service users will want to see.
Marché naissant et donc son avenir demeure encore incertain. Et le potentiel du MaaS de répondre aux besoins des habitants sera maximisé grâce à la concurrence ouverte dans le marché. Voilà pourquoi un accès ouvert au MaaS
meet consumers' needs and deliver the sustainability outcomes the region has a mandate to deliver. Mobility operators and MaaS providers should be regulated separately. Specific regulations already exist to cover the licensing and operation of mobility services, but MaaS providers can function without operating transport services themselves and are therefore not necessarily subject to mode-specific regulation. MaaS providers should be regulated separately rather than trying to combine the licensing of mobility operators and MaaS providers in a single MaaS regulation. And this is especially important since under our recommendations, mobility operators can also offer MaaS provider services under specific competition policy safeguards. We recommend that a new MaaS provider license be created by the Brussels Capital Region in its MaaS ordinance. Why? Because MaaS providers represent a new entity in the transport market. In their role, they will have access to substantial amounts of consumer and commercially sensitive data. MaaS providers, therefore, must be monitored to ensure they comply with all regulated data security, data sharing, and data reporting requirements. The regional government should adopt a legal definition of a MaaS provider, which includes its status regarding the processing of personal data and establish a specific MaaS provider license. However, at this early stage in the development of the regulatory framework, only minimal conditions, essentially requiring compliance with data regulations, should be incorporated in that license. At the same time, conditions for mobility operator licensure should be reviewed to ensure that they do not impose undue constraints on the activities of mobility operators, which could in turn inhibit the development of MaaS. In particular, mobility operator licenses will need to be extended to cover data sharing amongst market actors and the reporting of data to public authorities. Now, at the center of the MaaS ecosystem is the data sharing and data access provisions between mobility operators and MaaS providers. Without these, the market cannot exist. But here, it's important to make the distinction between data sharing amongst market actors, which enables MaaS to function on the one hand, and data reporting from market actors towards public authorities, which allows the public authorities to monitor the functioning of the market and, if necessary, intervene. Data sharing responsibilities for mobility operators and data access rights granted to MaaS providers will allow the latter to create new cross-modal mobility offers tailored to the needs of individuals. Data sharing is at the heart of the creation of the secondary market that MaaS represents. This market and the entire MaaS ecosystem must build on a shared data resource. This data resource can be centralized in a single backend available to all licensed MaaS providers, or as we suggest, it can be decentralized and built on a set of standardized application programming interfaces or APIs implemented by mobility operators that provide secure, access controlled, and limited data access pathways with which MaaS providers can build their offers. In all cases, responsibilities and rights relating to data should be added as standard conditions to existing mobility operator licenses and future MaaS provider licenses, as I noted earlier. Data portability is necessary to deliver cross-modal personalized travel services. And to do this, data on individuals' on-trip travel should be shared among the operators that provide parts of that origin to destination trip. Such enhanced data portability may be seen as a burden by some operators, but it contributes to the common data resource which enables market actors to innovate and create value. However, data portability must be subject to user consent in line with the EU's GDPR regulations. Avoiding distortion of competition in the market is particularly important in light of the uncertainty around which MaaS models may be economically viable. And this is especially the case for hybrid mobility operator MaaS provider actors. Licensees should be required to treat their own and external mobility services equally. Cross-subsidizing MaaS provider activities via funds from mobility service activities should be prohibited, as this could provide an unfair competitive advantage. The MaaS provider activities of any licensees, whether public or private, that are also mobility operators should be undertaken separately from transport operations. Public transport operators and MaaS providers should be free to negotiate the terms for the provision of public transport services that will be sold through MaaS platforms. Doing so may require revising existing instruments, such as the management contract between the region and STIB MIVB, as I noted at the outset, but this is important rather than having them being addressed directly through the MaaS ordinance. MaaS providers should also be given the freedom to develop offers they believe will attract consumers. If there are negative outcomes and effects for sustainable transport, these should be addressed through broader mobility policies outlined in Good Move rather than in the MaaS regulation itself when it pertains to changes in the way in which these fare agreements are implemented between the public transport operators and the MaaS providers. Good practice in ensuring regulatory quality should be followed as the MaaS ordinance takes shape. And here, three crucial things. Objectives underlying the regulation must be clearly specified. The second is that the impact of the chosen regulations ought to be assessed and compared systematically via a proportionate process of impact assessment that uses consistent methodologies. And finally, regulatory development should be conducted through open consultative processes, as has been the case in the Brussels Capital Region to date. These are standard best practice approaches endorsed by the OECD and the EU. Data reported by mobility operators and MaaS providers to public authorities allows public authorities to monitor and enforce compliance with rules aimed to ensure public policy outcomes. This data is also essential for planning purposes and can help to identify and rectify regulatory weaknesses. Reporting requirements for this purpose should be specific and limited to clearly identified regulatory tasks to avoid overburdening MaaS stakeholders. Many participants in this project's consultation phase raised the specter of negative sustainability outcomes that could be linked to some configurations of the MaaS market. The region must be vigilant with regards to these impacts, but we recommend that policy actions to improve the sustainability performance of the evolving MaaS ecosystem should be pursued through the broader Good Move package. These include direct measures to control congestion, to reduce emissions, and to improve safety across the transport system, rather than regulations targeting only actors in the MaaS ecosystem. Adopting such a broad policy approach will be more effective for achieving mobility objectives. This recommendation also represents a vote of confidence on our part on the ability of Good Move to deliver on its mandate. So there you have them, our 11 recommendations to the Brussels Capital Region. As Secretary Kim said, these recommendations will now have a life of their own, but we are convinced that they will help foster a vibrant, thriving MaaS ecosystem, a MaaS ecosystem that leverages new choices and digital innovation to meet the traveling needs of those who live and work in the region, a MaaS ecosystem which creates new commercial opportunities for public and private actors, and most importantly, a MaaS ecosystem that contributes to make the Brussels Capital Region the sustainable and livable heart of Europe. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Philippe, and thank you to the Minister, to Director Berger, and to Secretary General Kim for their warm remarks at the start of the session as well. Before proceeding, I'd just like to remind those of you in the audience that you can use the Q&A function to submit any questions on the presentation that you've just seen or on the discussions as they progress. I see several people have already submitted questions, which we will come to in the second half of the session. But again, please do use that Q&A function to submit your questions by text. So before we do get to that discussion, I would like now to offer the Minister speaking from the perspective of Brussels Capital Region. So we've heard ITF's key recommendations, but I would like now to invite the Minister if you have any comments that you would like to make on those recommendations.
I have a lot of comments I would like to make. So thank you very much for these interesting results. I think they're very important and they show us how rich this project is so far. And I really liked the beginning where Mr. Christ explained that if you look at the history of Brussels, and you feel it even today, if you walk through certain neighborhoods, that you have the impression that Brussels is made to host cars and to make a policy that has one aim, that's accommodate cars, accommodating cars passing through. But Brussels has such a potential to become another city. We have more than 1 million people living in it. We are the heart of Europe. We like to accommodate a lot of tourists and people working here, congresses. So for us, Brussels can be so much more than just a place where cars pass through, but we need to make other choices to do so. We really need to change our politics. And as it said, we have this mobility plan, Good Move, in which we have the goal and the objective to make Brussels more livable, to make it a nice city to live in, to visit, and where the people are at the heart of the policy and not the cars passing through. And to reach that goal, which is ambitious because we really need to make a big shift, we have listed 50 actions because we didn't want just a plan, we want a plan that goes to action. And we grouped it in 6 teams, and it's really with clear goals, and MaaS is one of the elements in which we work, but it is part of a broader policy, of course, to make it sure, because if we want to make these livable neighborhoods, we will need to do all of the actions that are in it. It's not just an option to do only MaaS or only create circulation plans. We will need to do it all. And as it was said by Mr. Christ, we cannot just say that, well, MaaS will solve everything, and that if there's a problem, MaaS says it's part of a solution, it's part of changing habits, it's part of changing the way Brussels is organized. And it's very concrete, and we need to make sure that we can develop MaaS to a large scale, because that's we need, so we can make sure that citizens can use an app or another way to plan, to book, and to pay for trips that use different transport modes offered by different operators, because in Brussels we are very monomodal. You're either a cyclist or an automobilist or a pedestrian, but we need to become multimodal, all of us, because there's a lot to win in it for ourselves, because we will win time, we will be more healthy if we walk more and cycle more. It will create a healthier city, but it's also what we need to make traffic more fluid, and so the success in developing MaaS will improve also the accessibility for people without access to cars, and help to achieve also the goal of moving away from this private car use. And we'll always have private car use, it will stay, but making sure that all the other alternatives, because there are a lot of alternatives in Brussels, that are better known and better used, and make sure that every time somebody needs to go from point A to B, it is a separate choice, and it's considered as a choice within different options, and you're really going to see what are the circumstances in which I'm going from A to B. Do I have my children with me? Do I have a lot of luggage? Am I wearing high heels? Is the weather good? So all those conditions may change the choice you make in transporting yourself, or in transporting your family, or your goods, if you and all those things need to be considered step in each moment people go from A to B. And of course, it's been said before, but we cannot repeat it enough. MaaS is not just an app. MaaS is really about creating this ecosystem, which is managed by a regulatory framework where operators can deliver added values for the users and for the Brussels region, and even beyond the Brussels region. And it's added value. This is new forms of mobility, but it can also be about, for example, gamification. You can have mobility monitor tools or reward systems. Like if I ride my bike, I can earn some coins, I can spend them in my local store. So all these options can be done with MaaS, but it is about creating that ecosystem in your system to make it happen. And that's the whole idea of the good service within our Good Move mobility plan, that are actions relating directly to mobility as a service. We aim to achieve public transport tariff integration, for example, to develop a regulatory framework and a backend platform to manage it, to host and exchange data. So these are all important elements. We also would like to make MaaS accessible beyond the boundaries of the region of Brussels, because the administrative, if you talk about ecosystems, then the borders might be a little bit artificial. So making sure that is a natural ecosystem, and so we can cross boundaries of the region would be a central element of as well. And of course, we also hope to keep control of the development of the MaaS to ensure a smooth development without, for example, unfair competition, which is also very important in creating a healthy MaaS ecosystem. So if we want to build this, we have a lot of work to do. So MaaS is an unproven concept. We must facilitate as a MaaS ecosystem as that is innovative, that is competitive, that is open to new players, so that it will maximize its chances of success. We also need to make the legal framework and give the legal status to the MaaS providers, making sure that we organize the regulation. We need to revise the regulation of mobility operators to remove any impediments to MaaS and ensure that there's a fair competition to the market. So we know there's a lot of work to do for us as a government, but also for all the stakeholders that will also have to adapt to fit this architecture. And that's why I'm very happy that everybody's working together in this project to make it possible. The mobility operators will need to meet the new MaaS-based data governance standards. This means that mobility operators will have to share information with MaaS providers so that integrated trips can be planned and can be carried out. It also means that data on individual trips, on-trip behavior should be shared among the operators that provide part of a trip to enable the development of personalized travel services subject to travel consent, of course. And finally, mobility operators will also have to adopt an unequal treatment principle in dealing with MaaS providers to ensure a fair competition. So these are all recommendations that I think for the government, but for everybody in the whole ecosystem means a lot of work and means an open mind to want to make it a success. And so I think it's important that to put this always in this bigger plan, the mobility plan of Good Move. The Brussels region has a clear strategy of working on and setting up a regulatory framework that will allow for MaaS to develop and hopefully also to thrive. And we know for sure that it's such an innovative topic will require a new approach and new ways of thinking. It will probably have to seek also for external guidance. That will be essential. And clearly the project so far has really met our expectations. I really would like to express that very clearly. These recommendations cover many topics of what MaaS is about. We know it's a diverse and a complex topic. It's a young topic, still very fragile and looking for a proper business model. But thanks to the project, we all become a little bit more MaaS experts, and we learned a lot. And and that's important. You have to try things, and sometimes things will work, sometimes things won't work. But if you don't have the courage to fail, you will never succeed. So it is really important that we go for it and that we continue learning from each other, give each other the trust to do so, and to create this whole vibe to make sure that MaaS will become the success it can be, because I'm convinced it is the future for mobility in Brussels and way beyond. And the consultation process was crucial for us. It led to recommendations Mr. Chris just summarized, and our first impressions are that the recommendations are very balanced also, and therefore they create opportunities for everybody. And that's important for us because we want to be a region that welcomes new ideas, new services, new businesses in the mobility space. And that's why I'm going to say it again, that ecosystem is so essential, this word, when we talk about MaaS. So let's work on that. Let's create an ecosystem that is dynamic, that is full of life, and create these opportunities. And we really appreciate that report emphasizes, to the strength also of Good Move. The numerous actions and measures listed in the report are sufficient to achieve most of our goals. There's no need to draft a whole new framework that could be heavy or too closed. MaaS, it is still young, it is still fragile, but we can create this level playing field that's adapted to the circumstances and give MaaS all its chances to succeed. So we have, of course, read the recommendations, but we'll go in much more detail and we'll start doing our homework as a government. We need to create this framework, this regulatory framework MaaS and the Brussels needs. And we are pioneers, and I hope to become, with this project, an example for other cities and regions as well, of course, so we can make sure that the future that has already begun is also happening in Brussels. But so thank you very much, and I really was inspired by all the results and the advices given and recommendations given in this report and in this study.
Thank you very much, Minister. Thank you for the feedback from the Brussels Capital Region and for putting our recommendations into context and really giving them life, taking them off the page. I think now if I could also introduce some panelists. Yes, okay, excellent. Thank you very much. So we're very pleased to be joined today by three representatives of actors in the ecosystem. So to repeat that point that the Minister made, it is very much about a MaaS ecosystem. And we too look forward to learning from the Brussels Capital Region in our turn as they take MaaS forwards. So I'd like to introduce now, please, Robert Fontaine of STIB MIVB. Robert leads the strategic planning for STIB MIVB and has been at the forefront of their MaaS strategy since joining them 6 years ago. Robert, thank you very much for your time. Great to have you with us. We also have Isha Lambrecht, newly a Senior Advisor for White Corporate Affairs, but formerly the Mobility Advisor and Strategy and Innovation Manager at the Brussels Chamber of Commerce, and speaking today from the perspective of commercial actors in the ecosystem. Thanks for being with us today, Isha. And finally, we have Victoire Champenois of DG Move, who has been working in the team on intelligent transport systems for the past 2 years and is responsible for topics related to passenger multimodality and leading the Commission's initiative on the multimodal digital mobility services. And Victoire, thank you very much for coming and actually physically being here today as well. And also we will be great to hear from you on the broader perspective shortly on how these recommendations could go beyond the Brussels Capital Region to Europe. So Robert, if I could turn to you first, given your position in the market. Obviously, you have several years' experience with MaaS, and Steve MEVB are obviously currently running the pilot, the Move Brussels pilot. So could I ask how you think the recommendations that Philippe has presented compare to or fit with the thinking that is already happening in Steve MEVB, please?
Okay, thank you, Ola. We are clearly asking ourselves this question for a while. So thinking of MaaS, obviously you have to think of the whole ecosystem, the potential regulation, etc. I must say that this very rich and qualitative study tends to clarify the path to a full ecosystem. There were many open questions that are now clarified, and we can move further. So we realize also even better the role of STIB. STIB is a big player in Brussels, and we understand that there are different roles to play, and that even a different regulation or rules will apply to the different layers of the ecosystem. So that's something now that is a bit clarified, and I want to explain now the 3 roles that MEVB STIB will have to play in the ecosystem. At first, we are a mobility provider, even not the smallest one of the region, and as such, as the minister said as well, or Philippe, it's often the public transport is a cornerstone of any successful MaaS in an urban context. So we have a responsibility here to play the game, to be collaborative with all actors, and so this is already an important role. Our customers also, a million-plus customer, expect also more intermodality. So it's an opportunity as well as a mobility service provider. But we are also in the system, and as said by Philippe, just one of the MSPs of the system. So we will abide to the same rules as the others as a mobility solution provider. We will play a second role, which is the MaaS provider role. As we started with the pilot Move Brussels, we will continue that role together with the Brussels Mobility. And we will enter in a competitive and dynamic market that will promote competition, innovation, etc. And also maybe one specific attention point for us is that we really want to align 100% to the Brussels Mobility sustainable objectives. Together with Brussels Mobility, we are a public organization, and we will clearly translate the Good Move objectives in the system. And we have a third role, which is on behalf of the region, this time to develop, to integrate, and to operate the platform, the central platform that will be at the center of the ecosystem, that will connect the different players, that will also help or enable some players to enter the market in an easier way than without this platform, by preparing API, pre-connecting some MSP to the system. So it's an enabler for more players to join the ecosystem. This is clearly in collaboration with Brussels Mobility. And one of these characteristics of this technical platform is also the link with the regulation, especially on data. This platform will certainly play a role in concretely building the data sharing elements that the regulation will recommend, for example, between the different actors. So in short, we are here to help the ecosystem to emerge and to be a success, and to have the positive sustainable mobility outcomes expected. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. That's all great to hear. Thank you very much. And Isha, I'm going to turn to you now, perhaps put a similar question to yourself. How do you see these recommendations fitting with the expectations of commercial actors in the ecosystem and shaping their potential future role?
Thank you very much for the question. So indeed, I'm going to speak from a private sector point of view. I think one of the recommendations, well, the recommendations as a whole are very balanced as the minister already pointed out. Specifically important for us is indeed the balance between public actors and private actors in the whole process, but also how it will be applied practically on the terrain in the Brussels capital region. We agree from a philosophical point of view that public transportation will be, should be, is the backbone of transportation in the Brussels capital region or in any urban ecosystem, if you wish. But that doesn't mean for us that a public transport authority has to be the backbone of the MaaS ecosystem. The recommendations are also very clear on that. It needs to be open entry. It also needs to be pro-competitive. So for a private market and for private players, that of course will be very important in the near future, which already has been which has been a topic of discussion in the last couple of years. We also see today that the MaaS platform that has been developed by the STIP MIVB already has taken an important part in Brussels, but we also see today that there are other projects which is called Smart Move, who are also working on a not only an application but a whole system, which also will include MaaS, and also public funds will be used to develop this project. So we also need to make sure that we don't get a competition between public actors, but that there is a real collaboration between public and private actors as a whole. Because underlying, and that is for me the message I'm going to give, because I also see that time is ticking. The underlying philosophy of MaaS is the freedom to choose how you go from door to door, and you choose your own means of transportation. And that choice only can be made if you have a very well balanced system between the backbone public transportation and other means of transportation as car sharing, bike sharing, other forms of micromobility, which will be offered by the MaaS providers, but also by other mobility providers in the Brussels capital region.
Thank you very much for that, Isha. And you've made some comments about the pro-competitive recommendations, which we will certainly come back to in the discussion shortly. But first, I would like to bring Victoire in. Victoire, you obviously have been working on this from a European perspective, and it would be great to get your thoughts, please, about the broader perspective on MaaS at the EU level in general, and then also how these recommendations might fit in, please.
First of all, the point I wanted to make and emphasize, as you would have understood also from the presentation from Director Berger, is that from the Commission side, we really strongly support the development of multimodal digital services. And we have recognized this in the context of a communication on the European Green Deal, also in the context of a communication on the sustainable and smart mobility strategy. And we believe that if properly developed, those services can really make a difference to enhance the efficiency, the sustainability, and the resilience of the transport system. With this objective in mind, in 2019, DG Move contracted a study to identify what were the hurdles that were impeding those digital services to thrive and to develop. And the outcome that we got from the study very much aligned with the recommendations actually that were presented earlier by Philip. And in particular, we also align with the key points, which are the need to make sure that we address competition concerns and that we develop specific market rules, looking at, on the one hand, and in a separate manner, mobility service provider, and on the other hand, the MaaS digital service provider, at the core of which, of course, we look at anti-competitive rule on data sharing and agreement to resell mobility products. The other point that was raised also by the other speakers and that we completely align with is the need to ensure that public transport is at the backbone of MaaS. And finally, the freedom to negotiate for us is also particularly important. And this will lead, in our view, to the creation of this ecosystem we have all been talking about, and to enhancing trust. I also wanted to put this word in the debate this morning. So now to achieve all this objective, and for the sake of time, I will try to be short, but we have identified in the sustainable and smart mobility strategy several pillars and several actions that we can take. Specifically in 2021, we will be looking at the revision of the ITS directive, in the context of which we are enhancing the creation, we will be looking at enhancing the creation of certain data that can help the services develop. And in parallel, we are also working on the revision of the 10T regulation. Many of us have been saying that MaaS is not only an application, we also need to look at the infrastructure side. And with the revision of the 10T, we will be looking at linking the infrastructure with the digital services. Finally, on data, on competition issues, our colleagues from DG Connect presented last year a data strategy with a lot of key elements that address B2B competition concerns, specifically the Digital Markets Acts, where we talk about gatekeepers, and the Data Act, which is being prepared and should be proposed by the Commission before the end of 2021, where our colleagues from DG Connect will look in a horizontal manner at data sharing agreements and also enhancing fairness in those commercial agreements. In parallel, in DG Move for 2022, we have planned to present an initiative on multimodal digital mobility services, where we will specifically look at how we can foster this ecosystem and enhance trust with 3 key objectives: enhancing predictability, coherence, and consistency of the commercial agreements around the EU between mobility service provider and digital services, ensuring that digital services are not discriminatory actually against small operators, and we will also look at the long distance services, or that they are themselves not limited by anti-competitive behavior. And finally, we want to make sure that those digital services, it has been mentioned also this morning, but for us it's key, they support our sustainability objective and also help cities, help authorities in their mobility management task with data reporting recommendation. So we are very grateful that we have been able to take part, to be included also a bit in this work. And we will take into consideration your recommendation to hopefully have a strong and coherent proposal at EU level, respecting as well, of course, subsidiarity and the specificity at local levels. Many thanks.
Thank you very much for that, Victoire. And again, some very important perspectives raised, which we'll come back to in the panel discussion. So I think if we can see the full panel again, please, I'd like to start to flesh out some of the issues that we've heard raised in these responses, and also that I can see coming in on the questions from the audience. So we've heard pro-competitive points raised. I have several questions from the audience on pro-competitive points. So at this point, I would like to introduce my colleague, Rex Dayton-Smith, who has been our regulatory policy and competition advisor on the project. So Rex, if you could join the panel, please. And I'd like to flesh out a few more of these points. So firstly, I'm going to come to kind of some of the questions which I've seen coming up, which I think come to the heart of the pro-competitive approach. And they cover off, firstly, the question of why should the resale of public transport tickets be negotiated? So I think in general that freedom to negotiate probably represents quite a shift in fares policy for some regions. So if you could talk a little bit more about the reasoning behind that recommendation, please, and what it is foreseen to achieve in enabling an innovative and fair MaaS environment, please. yeah, so I think if we start with that and then we can go from there. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks, Orla. You used the word innovative there, and I think that's really fundamental to the answer. Philippe made the point earlier that there's a degree of uncertainty as to whether there is a viable, sustainable commercial model for MaaS to be developed. And in that context of an emerging market where we really want to see a large-scale MaaS market develop, it's important to make sure that we give it the best possible opportunity to do so. That means that all of the participants in that ecosystem, both the MaaS providers and the mobility operators that provide the building blocks, need to be able to work toward providing innovative service offers that meet the needs of the customers of MaaS. And to do that, they need to be able to operate as freely in their dealings with each other as possible. And we mentioned the idea of it being an open entry ecosystem. That's important in order to maximize the kind of competitive pressures that themselves drive innovation. So freedom to negotiate is important for that reason. It's important to note that while there have been some concerns about what this would mean in practice, the public transport operators, which will, as we've said, be very much at the center of the ecosystem, operate under some important accountability and governance requirements that have been established for them by government. And I think we therefore, as a result of understanding that that is the case, need to repose a high level of confidence in them in terms of the way they will approach negotiations with MaaS providers and the kind of outcomes that will be achieved, and that they will be acting in ways that are consistent with broader public policies, of course, particularly including sustainable mobility policies.
Great, thanks, Rex. Okay, excellent. Thank you very much for that, Rex. So looking very specifically there at the freedom to negotiate point, just to flesh it out a little bit more, because it was raising questions, but looking more broadly now at the pro-competitive approach, I think Isha, if I could possibly start with you and get maybe some further thoughts from the point of view of your sector, please.
Yes, as stated, for us it is key that a MaaS ecosystem will always be pro-competitive, so meaning that it will allow not only public players but also different private players. I'm not going to go into detail as how much private players should be allowed, as for example in Brussels, but also in other cities, of course, internationally. We have the discussion about how many e-scooter providers can be allowed, because it also can add to some of the difficulties in a city. So putting these details aside, the idea always has to be a public-private partnership. Why is this important? Because the past has shown, and also has shown in MaaS, that mobility has become more flexible, has become more performant due to private players who has decided that with the technology today we can also offer mobility solutions. Brussels has been, as international cities, but Brussels specifically in Belgium, has been some of a laboratory on this topic, and we see here in Brussels that way people move and the mobility solutions that people use in Brussels is way more advanced than we see in Wallonia or that we see in Flanders. And it is my belief that it is due to the private players entering the market of mobility solutions. So if we want that mobility in the near future and in the far future stays something performant and also will answer to the needs of people and how they should or how they want to move in a urban environment, not only the public sector has the answer to that, but also private players.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Isha. And I must apologize, we are running out of time at a rate of knots and there is so much to be discussed. Minister, would I be right in saying that one of the hopes to sort of follow on from the establishment of MaaS is that it in itself fosters mobility innovations in the Brussels Capital Region, even moving beyond the ecosystem that these recommendations relate to?
Yes, absolutely. I think that's crucial. And for example, there's one question. So it's, well, I think there's very interesting things said already. One of the questions was, for example, what we do with people who are not able to put apps on a phone, and every time we have this reality of people not having access to digital means. And I think that's one of the questions that shows that we need to see MaaS as much more of an application, and really need to see as how do we organize all the offers in Brussels? How can we organize mobility really as a service centered as a person? And it's not just an application, it is really about who takes which role and how can we make a viable circumstances for all those players in this market. And you do have public players, you do have private players, and how can we make sure that it makes sense that there is, as said, a logic with other cities, and make it legible, that you can read it. So make sure that on the field you feel the difference and do the different things. For example, we're working on the integration of the tariffs of all our public transport. We have 4 public transport operates in Brussels. Of course, the STIP MFB is the most important and the most performant one because it's the Brussels one, but they're the main one in Brussels. But we also have a train company, the SNCB. We also have the Flemish and the Walloon transport company. So making sure that you have an integrated tariff, it's something that's way behind an application, way beyond MaaS, but really about integrating all our offer, integrating all our services, and making sure it's very easy to use and very flexible for users, and that multimodality becomes the logical choice and the only choice, because I think therein lies the true freedom of the future, that everybody can get everywhere in the way they want at the moment that they want to. And there's a lot of things to do to get there. I think there's a lot of challenges to do so, and MaaS will be a tool to get there. It's not a goal, it's really a tool to get there and to make it happen.
Excellent, thank you very much. And we fully agree about MaaS being a tool. So moving on, as in line with the pro-competitiveness, but also Victoire, you raised the work by DG Connect about data sharing, about fairness in agreements. So if I could bring Philippe back, please, because I think we should just, there's several questions on the data governance recommendations. Philippe, the main ones seem to center around the collection of the information, both from a commercial sensitivity perspective, and also an ownership perspective. And Victoire raised the point of gateways there as well. So perhaps you could talk a little bit more about the data governance recommendations. I am going to ask you to be very brief though, because we are running short on time.
Yep, we're looking at sharing data that relates to information about travelers and information about the availability of services, schedules, latency, etc. We're at location of transport assets, and we're also talking about information that allows the creation of a multimodal transport trip. So information and operations. We also provide a recommendation on providing the equivalent access that a consumer has to every mobility operator's booking and payment system, a deep link. In this case, all that we're saying is that a MaaS provider should be able to act as the agent for a consumer in accessing those services. And if there are negotiated agreements on full integration, well, that's up to the parties. That's certainly something they can do. All of those things that we say around data sharing fall and must necessarily be governed by the GDPR, which addresses all of those questions in terms of who is a data subject, what rights and responsibilities do data processors have, who owns the data. And what we're saying is that we are indicating that data sharing requirements will have to be implemented in this market, and that those data sharing requirements must be fully consistent with GDPR. And in some cases, we've identified areas where it may go slightly beyond, like on the question of data portability. Data portability is one of the fundamental aspects of GDPR. We're suggesting that for the market to work, the Brussels Capital Region and even the EU later on adopt a broader understanding of data portability, as it has in some other digital platform-based markets, like the market for payment processing services in the banking sector.
Thank you very much, Philippe. And Robert and Victoire, I'm going to come to you both very quickly because you both obviously have been doing work on this from two different perspectives. Robert first and then Victoire, would these recommendations be consistent with what you have been thinking around data sharing in an innovative and hybrid market setting?
Okay, thank you, Ola. For the data sharing, to be honest, we were not so far in the thinking. So we really, I would say, in a listening position to understand how exactly this data flow should happen. And honestly, without the discussions with ITF and the report, we would still be at level 0 of level 1 of the understanding. So I must just say that we, on that side, the position of STIP, of the reflection, were not that advanced, but understanding the fact that data is clearly at the center of the ecosystem and is really the oil in the system to enable all actors to offer something relevant to their own customers. So that's not an answer, but it's what I can say now.
And if I may, very quickly on data sharing, we already have actually regulation in the context of the ITS directive, where we require operators to share certain data, but there we talk mostly about information data. And so now with MaaS, we would take a step further and we would look at data enabling reselling of mobility products in general. There, as you would have understood, what I try to highlight is that your recommendation coincide, but we will also, of course, take them into account in the work that we are doing. It's work in progress with the Data Act and the proposal that we will have for MOVE on multimodal services. One key point, however, that Philippe underlined is, of course, that it should be in line with the GDPR and with the values and the objective that we have already established on data sharing at EU level.
Excellent. Thank you all so much. And I'm so sorry we won't have time to go into all of the questions that we have here, but it has been really good to get the different perspectives on the recommendations and hear from the different voices that will be in this hybrid multi-actor ecosystem when it is developed. So for our last port of call, I would like to ask my counterpart at Brussels Mobility, who has been dedicated to the project for the last 18 months. Martin, thank you very much for joining us today. Could I ask you to please just very briefly give us an idea of the next steps? This report obviously is just one part of a much broader work plan on MaaS in the Brussels Capital Region. So could you give us an indication of how MaaS is going to advance in the Brussels Capital Region beyond this, please?
Absolutely. Thank you, Ola. First of all, a quick thank you to everybody involved in the project, because it was really important for us to thank DG Reform, without whom this project wouldn't have been possible. Thank the whole ITF team for their infinite expertise and knowledge on this topic. And a very special thank you to you, Ola, for orchestrating all of this. So we are now reaching the end of the project. We have this report, we have these recommendations, and as we said, they are incredibly valuable to us for all of the reasons that we mentioned. But they are still very much their own thing. And as Secretary General Kim and Philippe Chris said earlier, every recommendations have a life of their own. And basically our job, our next steps will be to make these recommendations as alive as possible. What does that mean? Basically, I can think of a few things. First of all, indeed, create and set up this new framework, dedicated framework to the MaaS ecosystem in the Brussels Capital Region. So that, as a separate thing, is already a big challenge, but we are definitely going to start working very soon on that, and we have the intention of setting this up by the end of next year. But also we are going to have to translate these recommendations into other existing regulations. And all of these have their trajectory of their own. But one thing that is very important for all of us is to keep on working with this good move spirit, which I like to call, which is a collaboration, co-construction, consultation with every stakeholders involved in this topic. So that's why the use of the word ecosystem for MaaS is very interesting, because an ecosystem, in an ecosystem, every species relies on the existence of the other.
Hangt elke soort af van het bestaan van de andere.
had in the project so far, and to keep growing this community, this ecosystem. So that's very important for us, and we're going to try to create content and create this atmosphere of collaboration as much as possible, and keep on sharing most of the policies that we think are relevant with the stakeholders of MaaS. Thank you. Orla, back to you. Oh, there's a technical issue.
So I think there's
I'm now on Victoire's machine, so if I could ask you to switch, Keith, if I could ask you to please switch the screen to what would have been Victoire. Thank you very much for that, Martin. I apologize for the last minute dash around. My internet connection died, guaranteed, 11:15 on the dot. Thank you very much. So all that is left for me to say is on my own behalf to thank Martin for his dedication across the entire project, for all of his colleagues at Brussels Mobility's work, and for engaging with their stakeholders and bringing them on board for the workshops as well. This project would not be as comprehensive as it is without their dedication and the support of the stakeholders. I would like to also thank all our three dignitaries who provided opening remarks this morning, and to thank the Minister, Victoire, Isha and Robert for joining us for the panel. I'm only sorry we didn't have longer. But we are out of time. If you do have any remaining questions, which I know you do because I see them and I know we didn't get to them, please do feel free to email them into us this week. We'd be happy to hear any comments, feedback or questions from anyone in the audience before the end of this week. And I will send an email out to all those who registered after the event, so you will have my email address. And we'll include the link to the both registration for the publication and excuse me, the summary of the recommendations. But that is all from me. Thank you all, everyone here, and thank you all for your time.